Good afternoon. Welcome to our lecture program. I am Kostas Zanos, Vice President of Hellenic League Midwest and Chair of the Program Committee. Before introducing our speaker, I would like to bring to your attention our two following lectures. On Sunday, April 30th at 3 p.m. U.S. Central Time, Hellenic League Midwest will present Professor Robert Wallace on a lecture addressing the relevance of the writings of the great ancient Greek historian Thucydides to our times, which are mired with the deep political divisions in the United States, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and the threats of China to absorb Taiwan. On Sunday, May 21 at 3 p.m. U.S. Central Time, Hellenic League Midwest will present the Turkish professor Erol Saglan in an online lecture on the surviving legacy of Greeks in the Pontus region of Turkey. Our speaker this afternoon is Dr. Aristides Hatzis, Professor of Philosophy of Law and Theory of Institutions at the University of Athens, Greece. Professor Hatzis holds a PhD degree from the University of Chicago. He is the Director of Research at the Center for Liberal Studies Athens and a Fellow of the Institute for Research in Economics and Fiscal Issues in Paris. His book, The Noble Cause, the 1821 Greek War of Independence, will be published in the United States this year, 2023. His op-eds have been published by the New York Times, the Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the Atlantic, and CNBC, and he has given interviews to major international media outlets. He served as a member of the Greek National Committee for the bicentennial celebration of the Greek Revolution of 1821, and Professor Hatzis is joining us today from Athens, Greece. We will close the lecture, as always, with a questions and answer session. You can submit your questions at any time during or after the lecture by clicking on the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. This opens another screen where you can type your questions. Those attending the event on Facebook can type their questions on the comments box on the left of the bottom of their screen. Professor Hatzis, the screen is yours.
Hello. Hello from Athens. Is everything okay with the sound?
Yeah, I can hear you well.
Okay. Many thanks to the organizers, the Hellenic League Midwest, especially Kostas, Stefanos, and Savas. It is a great honor for me to give for the second time a lecture at the Hellenic League Midwest and return in some way to my to a city that I really love, Chicago. I'm going to share my slides now, and I'm ready to begin. I suppose that the slides are now visible to everyone, and I'm ready to start. On May 25, 1821, Petrobei Mavromichali, as the commander-in-chief of the Messenian Senate's army, addressed the citizens of the United States of America, asking for their help in the struggle against the struggle of the Greeks against the Ottoman Empire. This letter is well known. It was probably written by the group of intellectuals in the Alexandros Ypsilantis camp. It is also a text that is mostly considered now a firework, one of those pompous declarations that Greeks sent to the various nations in 1821, cajoling and demanding. It is supposedly one of those curiosities that came from the enthusiastic and over-optimistic Greeks during the first year of their revolution. Greeks were not specific in their demands. However, they asked only for diplomatic and economic assistance. While reading the empty rhetoric of some of these declarations, one wonders if there is some substance. Let's read the Petrobey Declaration more carefully. Petrobey makes some direct references to the political system of the United States. It is in your land that liberty has fixed her abode, and by you that she is prized as by our fathers. In invoking her name, we invoke yours at the same time, trusting that in imitating you, we shall imitate our ancestors and be thought worthy of them if we succeed in resembling you. The argument goes on. The Americans are near us, despite the great distance. They are nearer than the European nations. They are characterized as friends, φίλοι, fellow citizens, συμπολίτες, and brethren, αδελφοί, because they are just, humane, and generous, δίκαιοι, φιλάνθρωποι και γενναίοι. Americans are just because they are free, δίκαιοι, ότι και ελεύθεροι. According to Petrobey and the ghostwriter of the declaration, who apparently was not so well informed, American liberty is not propped up on the slavery of other nations, nor American prosperity on their calamities and sufferings, but on the contrary, the free and prosperous Americans are desirous that all men should share the same blessings, that all should enjoy those rights to which are all by nature equally entitled. The following paragraph sounds extremely awkward today. It is you Americans, who have been the first again to recognize them, these principles, in rendering the rank of men to the Africans, degraded to the level of brutes, αποκτηνωμένους. It is by your example that Europe has abolished the shameful and cruel trade in human flesh, from you that receives lessons of justice and learns to renounce her absurd and deadly customs. This glory, Americans, is your alone and has raised you above all the nations which have gained the name for liberty and laws, rule of law. The letter makes reference to many references to William Penn, to George Washington, to Benjamin Franklin, asked for, and to many other founders. And this letter asked for an alliance founded on freedom and virtue, but also on common economic interests, συμφέροντα. Greece will then furnish you advantages, κέρδη, which you can in vain seek from her ignorant and cruel tyrants, meaning the Ottomans. The Petrobey Declaration was accompanied by a cover letter written in Paris 2 months later, on July 27, 1821, and signed by Petros Ippitis, the official spokesperson of the Alexandros Ypsilantis. He was called απεσταλμένος των Ελλήνων στρατηγών, the spokesperson of the Ypsilantis revolution, or Ypsilantis campaign. The letter was addressed to Edward Everett from Paris, and it was co-signed by Adamantios Korais and others. Hippaitis in his letter addresses Everett as a liberal citizen of a free country. He repeats that the other powers are indifferent, anesthety to the voice of justice, religion, and kindness. And he emphasizes the message of the Petrobe letter. Humanity counts on the new world for its restoration, anakenesis in Greek. However, for us, your example is not enough. We currently also need your assistance, synergia. He repeats that Greeks are not ungrateful. In this paper, we are going to discuss the way that the Americans reacted. American scholars, at least since 1927, have documented both the official policy of the US government, but also the attitudes of the public in the major cities of the East Coast from 1821 to 1827. And the colossal humanitarian assistance that American civil society gave to the Greeks at that time. Most recently, Maureen Santelli, in her excellent monograph, and the American School of Classical Studies, in a beautiful special publication, it covered almost everything on that front. I'm more interested in the way Greeks perceived the Americans and the Madisonian Republic as possible allies, but also as a political and constitutional model. The first semi-official contact between the revolutionaries and the US was the result of an initiative by the legendary Commodore Jacob Jones, who was the commander of the Mediterranean Squadron, which was the precursor of the US Sixth Fleet. The Mediterranean Squadron consisted of 3 ships. Jones he had not received any orders from the US Department of Navy concerning the Greek issue. He sent his officers to the Peloponnese mainland, but also to Hydra and Spetses to gather more information on the real situation in Greece. According to his orders, his representatives should have treated the Greek revolutionary administration as the de facto government. This led to an unofficial meeting on June 19, 1822. John was the host in his frigate, with 3 representatives, not of the Greek government, but of the island of Hydra, were invited. They were treated with respect, hospitality, and an outright friendliness. He assured them that the heart of every American sides with the Greeks. He let them know that he had not received any orders from his government on the Greek issue because he had left the US in late December of 1820, and he was frank to them. He asked for information on the Greek military power and adequacy of provisions, and asked them how they believed that they would achieve their goals. The Hydriots assured him that the Greeks only needed money, nothing more, and they offered a strong reputation in the Mediterranean markets, but also the public lands as a guarantee. Jones assured them, even though he emphasized that this was his private opinion, that the American government would certainly help the Greeks achieve their independence. But the American assistance could not be a military one, but a concealed financial assistance. Americans would be happy to take such a risk. He offered himself as the conveyor of the official correspondence from the Greek to the US government. He concluded by emphasizing that the US needed an ally in the Eastern Mediterranean, a strong sea power, and the Hydriot representatives declared that the Greek government would happily offer an island as a naval base for the US in exchange for the assistance. The Hydra notables, after the end of the meeting, sent a message to the Greek government asking it to pursue a pro-American policy, assuring it that America could give us a generous financial assistance. Να μας οικονομήσει πλουσιοπαρόχος. The letter was sent to the members of the executive on June 24, 1822. It was the worst time possible. Mavrokordatos was in Epirus in his ill-fated campaign to protect Souli and create a distraction to the Ottomans. Dramali was in Viotia, ready to cross the isthmus of Corinth, and every member of the executive and the parliament was either in battle position or hiding in ships. A year later, Alexandros Mavrokordatos was ready to pursue this policy. Mavrokordatos was persuaded that Greece should avoid any attachment to a European power. This was not only his opinion. It is well known that Mavrokordatos, in his secret instructions to the Greek representatives, he asked them to approach the ambassadors of the United States in London and Paris. He asked them to do this secretly and very carefully. The new Greece should have as the closest ally the model republic, the birthplace of the idea of constitutional government, a major power which would never threaten the Greek independence. In only 2 days, June 21 and June 22, he wrote the secret instructions to the Greek representatives, but also another secret letter with his instructions to Andreas Louriotis, one of the 2 Greek representatives. He specifically asked Louriotis to try to approach Canning, offering Greece as a buffer zone against the Russians in the Balkans. But at the same time, he wrote 2 letters, one to Albert Gallatin, the US ambassador in Paris, and the other to John Quincy Adams, the Secretary of State of the United States of America, and later the President of the United States. In these letters, Mavrokordatos is blunt. A mission which is about to be sent to London for the negotiation of a loan is at the same time directed to enter into secret negotiations with you. Mavrokordatos was optimistic because the US was the first great power to recognize the Greek Revolution rhetorically with the 1823 State of the Union. He did not know at the time that the United States had already adopted unofficially the Monroe Doctrine on not intervening to European affairs. Mavrokordatos turned to England only after he realized that the US government were not going to assist the Greeks after all, rather when he realized that the Greeks were not ready to do whatever it takes to attract the American interest. Less than 2 months after the death of Byron and Missolonghi, and while the Canning policy towards the Greeks was unfolded, with the London Committee and the city loan as its instruments, Mavrokordatos was still not persuaded that England is a credible ally. Quote, "We should be careful to understand the way of thinking of the English government. We should be very careful in many different ways." End of quote. And he still believed that the US would play the role of the ally much better. He believed it so strongly as to be ready to abandon his political career in Greece and the leadership of the revolution. Quote, "The mission to the US is essential. If you think I'm competent enough, I offer myself to travel there, even though this is a long and tedious trip. I'm pretty sure that I'm going to be of a great use to Greece. If I can land there, I can be of great use to Greece, if I can land there. There is no doubt that I will achieve our diplomatic recognition and ensure many forms of assistance from the Americans." Mavrokordatos sent this letter to Georgios Kountouriotis, the head of Greek administration, on June 3, 1824. Nobody was interested anymore to such an assistance, while the English loan was underway. Mavrokordatos was disappointed, as his correspondence with Edward Everett implied, and he was more disappointed when Greeks decided to offer to the British the monopoly of their protection. He realized that Great Britain was Greece's only option and Canning, the best friend of the Greeks, could have. He forgot his pro-American stance, and he only hoped for Greeks to recover their liberty and assume a place among civilized nations in imitation of the Americans. Mavrokordatos did not know that the real battle took place at the Monroe cabinet in the US when two ministers of the American government tried unsuccessfully to persuade the president, Monroe, and the Secretary of State, John Quincy Adams, that the US should make a special exception to the Monroe Doctrine in order to assist the Greeks. While the pro-American geopolitical plan of Mavrokordatos collapsed, an unlikely ally appeared on the scene, offering another version of an American dream. America appeared now not as an ideal ally, a strategic partner, but as an ideal polity, a model constitution. The unlikely ally was a colonel from the British Army who was also the representative of the London Greek Committee. But to better understand his role, let's go back to June 1821 and to the Commodore Jones' first contact with the Greeks. Commodore Jones was first to suggest to the representatives from Hydra that Greeks should play the political system card with the Americans. He said that he was happy to see the advancement of the constitutional government in Greece, and he insisted that Greeks should emphasize the common love for liberty, φιλελευθερία, of the two nations. Mavrokordatos did just that when he wrote to John Quincy Adams. He mentioned not only common interests, but also common constitutions. Quote, if an immense distance separates America from Greece, their constitutions and their reciprocal interests bring them so close together that we cannot possibly omit to look forward to the establishment of relations whose happy results cannot possibly be doubted. A mission which is about to be sent to London for the negotiation of a loan is at the same time directed to enter into secret negotiations with you. But as I told you, these negotiations did not have any result. An issue which is still unexplored is the influence of the American Constitution to the first Greek constitution of Epidaurus. In Epidaurus as well as in Astros, the proponents of the American system of government tried to transplant several American institutional innovations, and they failed. Polyzoidis and a new generation of liberal intellectuals would be wildly successful in 1827 during the Trizina constitution drafting. This was the result of a very short career in the Greek Revolution of a military man who did not have any interest in the war, but only in transplanting liberalism and one specific version of liberalism in the Greek revolutionary state and society. Colonel Stanhope was the real commissar of the London Committee, who was more interested in assembling the 4 printing presses he brought with him than the guns and the cannons. 2 months before his arrival in Missolonghi, Lester Stanhope met Ioannis Kapodistриas in Geneva. Quote, the Count Kapodistриas resumed by observing that the committee had done and might still do great good, but that we must not attempt to Anglicanize Greece. I replied that we rather wished to Americanize her. Colonel Stanhope's mission in Greece is generally considered as a failure. His plan was to publish 4 newspapers under the auspices of the London Greek Committee, and he only published 2. His intention was for the newspapers to become flagships of the Bentham Circle, but he lost control of both of them after conflicts with Lord Byron and Alexandros Mavrokordatos and his early departure from Greece. However, it is a huge mistake to underestimate the influence of Colonel Stanhope's short visit in the ideological development of the Greek Revolution. The first issue of Ελληνικά Χρονικά was published under Stanhope's supervision on January 1st, 1824. You can see here issue number 40 with some story from Baltimore. The presence of Stanhope and influence on people like Jacob Mayer and Georgios Psyllas, the editor of the newspaper of Athens that was published in Athens, were crucial for the development not only of these newspapers, but also of a third newspaper that was published the same year in Hydra, Philos του Νόμου. These newspapers were politically controlled by the winning side of the Civil War, but the 3 editors were quite independent. They were all radical liberals with a very shady past. Mayer, the editor of Ελληνικά Χρονικά, was expelled from the university in Germany for unidentified reasons. Giuseppe Chiappe, the editor of the Friend of the Law, the Philos του Νόμου, you can see issue 112 of the Friend of the Law with some news from New York on the front page. Chiappe was a former Carbonaro and the editor of the third newspaper, Εφημερής Αθηνών, Georgios Psyllas, was possibly a member of the German radical liberal group which assassinated August von Kotzebue in Mannheim in March 1819. Stanhope's printing machines became a vehicle for an unprecedented ideological hegemony of moderate but also radical liberal ideas in the Greek press of the period. The 3 newspapers dictated the political terminology of the revolution, while their effect on every class, including the illiterate warlords, was immense and much underappreciated even today. This influence had at least 4 major political repercussions. The emergence of a small group of intellectuals who became the radical wing of the revolution because of their republicanism. For them, the optimal form of government for Greece was the Madisonian Republic. For the reader of the 2,600 pages of the 3 newspapers, it becomes obvious that the United States were the most popular foreign power of the time in revolutionary Greece. The US appears rather falsely in these pages as unconditionally friendly to the Greek cause, and President Monroe is indisputably the most popular foreign leader. The American Revolution is presented always under the most positive light, in contrast with the French Revolution, a revolution that led to the terror, and George Washington emerges as the most populous non-Greek historical figure. The memoirs of leading and minor leaders corroborate this impression. The 3 newspapers adopted an approach to the freedom of the press which is almost Madisonian. It is the object of numerous op-eds and analysis, especially by the members of the radical pro-American group. The impact of this approach is obvious in the proceedings for the drafting of the 1844 and the 1864 constitutions. And finally, in 1827, the Third National Assembly in Trizina passed a new constitution which essentially adopted the American form of government with innovations, institutional innovations like staggered elections, unitary executive power, judicial review, presidential veto power, clear separations of powers, which are identified with the US. There is even a version of the "We the People" rationale in the preamble. Despite the rhetorical goodwill of the American government and the strong philhellenic commitment of the US, which led to an unprecedented humanitarian aid to Greece in 1827-1828, this radical wing never established ties with politicians, journalists, and intellectuals in the US. One of the reasons being the fact that Greeks had an idealized vision of the US, and they could not always understand the workings of the American system. Another misunderstanding, or rather a deliberate downgrade, was the issue of slavery in the USA, which Greeks, especially the Greek liberal intellectuals, who were adamant against slavery, were not able to see what was happening to the southern states. The references to the slavery are almost non-existent. At the same time, as I have recently discovered, the Haitians rejected the appeal of Greeks for help, suspecting that, quote, the color of our soldiers would have been a reason for their being badly received in Greece. For the liberal Greek intellectuals, the political system of the United States of America was the ideal political model. When the Greek Revolution began in 1821, Hatzis Petsalis was only 19 years old. He studied law, became one of the best defense lawyers in post-revolutionary Greece, and in his late 60s served as the country's Minister of Justice. His description of the political aspirations of the Greeks was written in 1841, 20 years after the revolution began, but in a time when the Greek revolutionaries groaned under the absolutist monarchy of the Bavarian King Otto. According to Hatzis Petsalis, quote, at the time of the outbreak of our revolution, we were lacking in political ideas, but everyone was inspired by the Americans. When the Greek revolutionaries had to explain what the political principles behind their struggle against the Ottomans were, they always referred to the US as their model. Of course, Greeks at the time had a superficial knowledge of the American Constitution, but all of them could understand the nature of the political society that the US Constitution envisioned, and most Greeks shared that vision. They were hoping that their future would be based on similar political foundations. The pro-American Greek intellectuals were not isolated. As early as July of 1823, a typical traditional notable, George Sicinis, laments that the upcoming of civil war in a very interesting way. Quote, we entertain the hope of becoming a new America, but alas. The same month, Adamantios Korais, writing to Alexandros Mavrokordatos, urges him to persuade the Greeks to accept the American system of government. But there were always few. Meyer laments this fact in one of his editorials on May 1824 in Greek Chronicles. Quote, we, the democratic Republican Greeks, are few, but we are the better patriots. Greece should have as a model Switzerland or the USA. The Americans have the best administration. They live happily under the rule of law. Their laws are made simply and in a transparent way. This is why the USA is the happiest place on earth, much more blissful than other countries. where the aristocrats are governing with secrecy. The attempt of Colonel Stanhope to Americanize Greece led to the emergence of a marginal but strong republican tradition in Greece, which would play a major role in the political crisis of the long Greek 19th century. It also led to a strong tradition of a liberal-minded, anti-authoritarian press, which would give major battles against any kind of infringement of rights and liberties, especially the freedom of the press from 1828 to 1875. Recently, and this is my last slide, I have written an editorial about the influence of the United States political system and the United States Constitution to the Greek Revolution, but not only to the Greek Revolution, but to the Greek modern state in general. As I said, the editorial was published by The Atlantic, and it is available to whoever is interested, and she or he can send me an email at this address, at Hatzis, at PHAUAGR, and I will be happy to send her or him both the slides of this presentation and the editorial published in The Atlantic. Thank you so much for attending the lecture, and I'm now ready to answer any possible questions, or if you need any clarifications for my arguments and the various quotes and etc. Please.
Thank you very much, Professor Hatzis, for this very, very interesting lecture. Stefanos, can we take please the slide so I can see what happens on the screen? Okay, very good. So let me see if there are Q&A. Stefanos, I cannot see the Q&A. I cannot contact. I have no. Q&A. Okay. Let me ask the first question until others they have the chance to put down their questions. Were these newspapers, they were printed, and who were the readership and how they were distributed at the time?
Yeah, this is a very interesting question. One of the problems being the fact that most Greeks were illiterate. They could not read newspapers. However, these newspapers were widely read, but in various ways. For example, someone who was literate and he could read the newspaper, he would go to a coffee shop, and then many Greek fighters, merchants, farmers would assemble and to hear the news coming from the newspaper. The newspaper was, and the publishing of their heroic acts in the newspaper was so important for them that they were ready to cry when they realized that their name was not mentioned in one of Ελληνικά χρονικά story about a particular battle, or to threaten the editors that they are going to burn the newspaper, to burn the building that the newspaper had its headquarters, as a revenge for omitting their names. This is a real story that Nicholas Kasomoulis, in his memoirs, describes about a very funny episode with Georgas Zavelas threatening Mayer for not covering correctly a particular battle in Mesologi, incorrectly meaning that Mayer did not mention Zavelas' name, and he mentioned Botzaris in that story, the story that was published in Ελληνικά Χρονικά, in the Greek Chronicles, even though Botzaris was dead.
Did these people like Botzaris and Zavelas who were able to read newspapers?
Botzaris Botzaris died before the publication of the first newspapers. He died in Kefaloris. So, however, Botzaris was a literate man, and actually he was the one who wrote the first Greek Albanian dictionary, because he was both, he was proficient in both languages. As Sulioti, he could speak both Greek and Albanian, Arvanitic as we call them now.
I see. Now, you mentioned all of these liberals, intellectuals, and especially the intellectuals, and that was 1824. The revolution started in 1821. So Greece, most of the people, they were illiterate, as you mentioned. So where these intellectuals they were coming from?
Most of them were coming from Europe. Some of them from some of the great schools in the Balkans. From Smyrna, from Chios, from Aivali, which had one of the best schools in the Eastern Europe, Yanina, and places like this. Places where the Greek
schools.
The Greek Enlightenment, some of the best schools of the Greek Enlightenment. However, there were a lot of intellectuals that studied in major universities in France, in Germany, some of them even in England, and also in Russia, in Central Europe, in Austria, places like this.
So these people, they just flocked to Greece in such a short interval, because 1824 is 3 years.
Actually, most of them came to Greece in the beginning of the revolution, but they came to Greece in waves. But I think that most of them, most important of them, arrived to Greece in 1821 or in 1822. For example, the Mavrokordatos Circle was organized in Missolonghi during the summer and the fall of 1821. Anastasios Polyzoidis, which was very instrumental in adapting a version of the Greek of the US Constitution in 1827, who studied in Vienna, in Göttingen, and the University of Berlin, came to Greece, I think in late summer or in early fall of 1821. He was the one who wrote the Declaration of Independence, having the American Declaration of Independence as a model. He was also the famous judge who resisted the attempts of the Bavarian Regency to execute Kolokotronis.
Thank you very much. So let me go to the first question from the audience. The first question is from Carmen M. Were these newspapers disseminated to all Greek cities, or was there a variation in access depending on the distance to the urban centers or terrain characteristics?
Hello, Carmen. This is a very interesting question. Actually, Stanhope, when Stanhope came to Greece, one of his first priorities was not only to establish a newspaper, but also to establish schools modeled after the Lancasterian system, because as a good liberal at the time, he believed that if someone is educated, he's determined to become a liberal. And the third priority for Stanhope was the creation of an efficient postal service, in order for the ideas, the newspapers and the ideas included in them to be circulated as fast as possible. Now, the amazing thing is that especially ελληνικά χρονικά had access, almost every Greek had access to a copy of ελληνικά χρονικά. Almost everybody in Greece had read some copies of ελληνικά χρονικά. I suppose that this is the result of the great demand for ελληνικά χρονικά, but also for Εφημερής Αθηνών, for the newspaper of Athens and the Friend of the Law. However, ελληνικά χρονικά was the most popular one, especially during the second siege of Missolonghi. Now, which is the funny fact? Ελληνικά χρονικά were so popular that even members of the Ottoman or the Egyptian army paid good money, or even paid in food and wine to get copies of ελληνικά χρονικά, because they wanted to read the news from ελληνικά χρονικά. Apparently, Egyptian spies wanted to bring ελληνικά χρονικά to Ibrahim himself and see whatever was written there. Another very distinct thing is that ελληνικά χρονικά reached a lot of cities in Italy, in Central Europe, including Switzerland and Germany. There was a bookstore in London under an arrangement with the Greek London Committee, which sold the Greek Chronicles, and not only Greek Chronicles, but also Εφημερής Αθηνών, and probably Philos του Νόμου to the British readers. And there were articles published in newspapers like London Times, where they discuss news coming from Greece as they were printed in the Greek Chronicles. Actually, the first time that London Times received a package with issues of Greek Chronicles, the editorial was enthusiastic about it. Not so much because they learned useful info, intel from these newspapers, because the British government knew almost everything from their spy activities, and the fact that they were intercepted every letter that was destined to pass through the Ionian Islands, but it was very important for them to read, as they wrote, to read a newspaper written in Greek by Greek intellectuals who were the descendants, as the Times wrote, of people like Thucydides and Plato and Homer and Xenophon.
Were at the time newspapers printed in the Ottoman Empire? Because I have read that the press in Turkey came very, very late.
Yeah,
So
actually,
did they have printing in Turkey? Are they had newspapers at the time?
there was not a newspaper in the Ottoman Empire at the time, with one exception: the Ottoman, the Oriental Spectator, a newspaper that was published in Smyrna in French, by French editors who were very friendly to the Ottoman policies, let's say, and the few newspapers in Europe that were friendly to the Ottomans, especially the Austrian newspapers, some conservative newspapers in France, were reprinted stories from the Oriental Spectator that were anti-Greek and pro-Ottoman. However, this newspaper was not considered impartial, and every story coming from the Oriental Spectator was treated, let's say, with a pinch of salt. I mean, they were rather suspicious of this particular newspaper, which was, I mean, it was not less objective than the Greek newspapers of the time.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Let me see here, because I have problems again to access the Q&A.
Mm.
Let me start this again. Okay. Okay, I have here from Stefanos a question. USA
Yeah.
was not a superpower at the time, obviously. How would it compare in terms of military or political economic power to the big European powers of the time, France, England, and Russia? At the end of the day, what was the material support that the US provided to Greece during the revolution?
Okay, that's a very interesting question, Stefanos. The US was already a great power. Everybody understood that it was destined to become one of the greatest powers in the earth. For Alexandros Mavrokordatos, was the ideal ally for the Greeks, not only because it was already a great power, but because Mavrokordatos felt that the Madison and Jefferson tradition in the US, the tradition of exporting the revolution, the tradition of the Madisonian Republic would be less dangerous for Greek independence than any kind of alliance with any kind of European power. Mavrokordatos thought that it would have been a mistake for Greeks to offer the monopoly of their protection to any of the major European powers, and this, at the same time, let's say, disillusion the other powers and make them enemies to the Greek cause. Now, I'm not sure if I answered
The question.
the question. I mean, I think that there is another thing that Stefanos mentioned.
Which was at the end the economic help that the United States
yeah, okay, about the help. Actually, the United States as a government, as a state, made only some important, very helpful, encouraging, purely rhetorical declarations on behalf of the Greece. This was important. I do not want, I want to emphasize that I don't want to let's say, understate the importance of the President of the US in his State of the Union recognizing the right of the Greeks to national independence. This was a very big thing for the time. This was something that was discussed in all the major newspapers. It was something that made made Great Britain to become suspicious that there was a chance that the US wanted to intervene in the Ottoman and in the Greek-Ottoman War, as they saw it. However, having said that, in 1827, 1828, one of the major humanitarian assistances in the 19th century, probably the biggest one in the 19th century, or probably the biggest one in general, from one country to another, was given to Greece by the United States civil society, not the government, literally saving the lives of thousands of Greeks. This humanitarian assistance was given solely to women and children and to the old people, not to the Greek army. This was probably a restriction that the US government imposed to avoid any kind of problems with the Ottomans. The United States government was mostly interested in serving their economic interest in the Ottoman Empire, especially after the Navarino battle. Because after the Navarino battle, everybody knew that the Ottoman Empire and Egypt would accept offers for the renewal of their navy, for the rebuilding of their navy, and the United States were very interested in competing for these contracts. So the United States was one of the few major powers, I mean, important countries that recognized independent Greece, even after countries like Austria and Prussia. So there is a great discrepancy, sorry for interrupting, Kostas, there is a great discrepancy between the official the official US government policy towards the Greeks and the unofficial but very impressive assistance of the American civil society towards the Greeks. And this civil society was part of this. I mean, a lot of the members of the Greek Phil-Hellenic committees, most of them were women, were after some years activists for causes like abolitionism and women's rights. So the American Phil-Hellenic movement was important in many respects, not only important for the Greek-American relations and for the Greek War of Independence, but also for American history.
The next question of Stefanos is, was there reliable mail service between USA and Greece at the time, or even Europe? How would Mavrokordatos communicate with the Americans, and how long did it take for a response?
Yeah, as you can imagine, this was, literally an odyssey to send a letter from Greece, from revolutionary Greece to the United States. Fortunately, the letter written by Mavrokordatos and addressed to the president, to the Secretary of State, John Quincy Adams, later President of the United States, reached John Quincy Adams, and you can now read it at the Secretary of State archives. I suppose that the best way to send a letter from Greece to the United States was to send the letters, of course, through the Ionians to Italy and then to Paris, and from Paris or London to the United States. This was the safest road. I suppose that many months or probably a year.
Well, there was a postal service at the time. How did it go?
I don't know the details about the postal. Apparently, the postal service from the Ionian Islands to London was rather fast, given the restraints of the period. Fast meaning 2 months from Corfu to not from Corfu, from Orias to London. But then to send a letter from London or from Paris to the US, this is a totally different story. I mean, it had to do with the ships, and I suppose that there were ships that were specialized in bringing mail to the United States. I know that there were ships that were carrying, for example, British publications. A British publication, let's take an example. In 1826, a Greek intellectual, a woman intellectual, Evanthia Kairi, wrote a letter addressed to the Phil-Hellenes, to the female Phil-Hellenes of Europe and the United States. The letter was published in late April in London Courier in late April, and the issue of London Courier reached Virginia in early June. So I suppose that this is, this particular issue can help us, can become something like we can use it as an example for the time that was needed for mail, newspapers, various kinds of news and info to reach the United States from Europe at that time.
Stefan, I cannot see the Q&A. Do you see any questions?
There are no more questions on Q&A.
Okay, so then I will ask my questions. Mavrocordatos, he was against the European powers and very much hoping the support of the United States. Now, the United States goes so far, and in terms of material support, as it happened with Navarino, the hope was more on the European powers than the United States. Did not Mavrocordatos realize something like that?
Yeah.
Or believe that the Greeks on their own, they would be able to carry all the burden of the war?
Yeah, that's a good question. For Mavrocordatos, this was a good thing. America, the United States were very far, so there was no danger for monopolizing.
Eternally, yes.
Yeah, I mean, it was very important for him. Mavrocordatos, as you might have noticed in his guidelines, let me show you again the guidelines to the Greek representatives. Mavrocordatos was adamant against any kind of military intervention to the Greek revolution. As you can see, one of his guidelines had to do with military intervention and advised order.
We cannot read it. Can you read it, please? Because you cannot read it.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, they are very... according to the third guideline, that secret guideline that he sent, quote, your mandate is to negotiate a non-exclusionary trade agreement with England. You have a broad discretion, but any agreement should be approved by the Greek government, who has the final say. We can accept financial help from England, but not military assistance under any circumstances. The only thing that we need is money, nothing more. His fear, I suppose that his fear was that the British government would be tempted to treat Greeks, especially Morias, the Peloponnese, as the Ionian Islands, as the Ionian, to control them, to transform them into a kind of semi-colony, semi-independent
entity,
supposedly autonomous state. So he preferred the United States because of this distance. He understood that the United States did not pose any kind of threat in that respect. At the same time, the United States were a very rich country, and as a liberal himself, was tempted to adapt, at the same time, to adapt a system of government that it was similar to the one in the United States. And this is actually what he wrote to John Quincy Adams in his letter of June 22. We don't know when this letter reached Adams, that there is an immense distance that separates America from Greece. However, our constitution and our interest bring us so close together. So Mavrocordatos used two arguments. We have common interests, but also we have common ideology, constitutional ideology, and the political ideology behind our constitution. That is why, for him, this was, I mean, he thought that the United States offered the best alternative for Greece, asking them for an assistance, mostly in a form of a loan, but also in trade agreements and only in the case of the United States in particular, even military assistance. I mean, Mavrokordatos, I suppose, wouldn't mind if the American fleet, the Mediterranean squadron, gave a hand to the Greek fleet.
How big was the squadron, the American squadron in the area?
There were three.
A few ships.
There were 3 ships.
Oh, 3 ships.
But
Okay.
there were 3 ships, but I suppose that these ships were extremely efficient and quite big. I don't know the details about these ships, but I suppose that they were the state of the art of that period. Actually, with the second loan, with the money of the second loan, from the second loan, Greeks ordered their ships from American shipyards. Of course, there were scandals. Of course, there were. However, the ship that was arrived from the United States was a kind of a super weapon at the time, Carteria. It was the first steam ship that was used for the first time in global history, that it was used in a battle. The Ottoman Navy was scared to death when, I mean, the sailors and the captains, when they saw a steamship attacking them. It was something reminiscent of the way that Averov, 100 years later, dominated Aegean.
I see. So the Turks at the time, they had no steamships.
No, the Greek Navy was the first navy globally to use a steamship in a battle. And this was an idea and quite early idea by some British captain, a Philhelene, Captain Abney Hastings. Hastings was the one who had this very interesting idea to have a steamship and use it in a battle. And apparently he was right, because the steamship in the Aegean was very effective, even though it had some malfunctions and some problems with the, I mean, it was not
new
constructed.
Technology.
It was a new technology that was not so much tried until then. The Greeks were the first to use it, but it was a very impressive ship. And as you know, in a war, sometimes the psychological factor is very important.
Stefanos or anybody, do you see any other questions before I go to mine?
No, I don't see anything on Facebook.
Okay, if I remember well, in high school, we were taught that there was in Greece the party attached friendly to the British, and then to the French, and then to the Russians, and so on. I'm mistaken that Mavrokordatos was considered to be the one who was the Philo-English.
Mavrokordatos, when he despaired and when he realized that there was no chance for an alliance with the United States, especially after 1825, 1826, when he realized that the monopoly of protection of Britain was a one-way street, he became pro-British. And actually, for the next, at least for a decade, he remained pro-British. He was not the leader of the pro-British party in Greece. I would say that Harilos Trikoupis, his associate, was the leader of that party. However, Mavrokordatos was certainly mostly pro-British rather than anything else. However, until the end of the revolution in 1827, he was trying to guarantee that the other powers, not only France and Russia, but also Austria, would share some, let's say, an amount of protection or of friendliness to the Greeks. For Mavrokordatos, I mean, that would be a great mistake to offer the monopoly of a protection to a particular European power. That would be, I mean, his foreign policy was quite sophisticated for the time, and he thought that Greece should not be involved in the competitions of the major European powers of the era. And I think that he was absolutely right on this front.
What about Yannis Koletis? Was Koletis a personality of the same stature as Mavrokordatos?
Well, Ioannis Koletis, who was the leader of the pro-French faction, is a very interesting figure. He was a realist. He was ruthless. He was ready to split blood if he thought that this was for the benefit of his goals, not only his political goals in the narrow sense of the word, but Koletis, as everybody else, was ambitious, and he had a particular dream for Greece, and he was ready to do whatever it took to realize his dreams, his way of seeing things. He was in several instances, competing with Mavrokordatos for political influence. However, he is rather demonized today. He's vilified. He's considered just a ruthless person. But I'm afraid that this is one of the simplistic and manichaeistic approaches that misconception that populist historians, populist historiography is usually treating its subjects. And
so was Mavrokordatos the main, let's say, contributor to the writing of the Constitution of Piada, or there was a kind of a committee, and it was by consensus that they reached the draft that they proposed?
Yeah, exactly. I believe now that the person who was mostly responsible for writing, the persons most responsible for writing the first draft, at least the first draft, was Theodore Negris, who was also a liberal intellectual and politician, and Vincenzo Gallina, a Carbonaro, an Italian Carbonaro from Ravenna, a lawyer who came to Greece as a member of Mavrokordatos' entourage, and to Piada as an advisor to Mavrokordatos. Negris and Gallina were the ones who gave this radical twist to the democratic and liberal, but also radical twist to the Greek constitution of Epidavros. Mavrokordatos was not so enthusiastic. I mean, he was not, he believed that adopting a radical democratic and liberal constitution was not so important. The most important thing for him was to safeguard the major political goal of the revolution, that was independence. That is why Mavrokordatos was always ready to negotiate everything, including the constitution, in order to achieve the greater goal, which was for him national independence. Actually, he wrote directly to Canning, saying something to the effect that we are ready to abandon our constitution, to accept a monarch, as long as as our national independence is recognized. For him, independence was more important national independence was more important than a liberal constitution, a liberal and republican constitution.
Did the military leaders of the revolution had any contribution to the constitution, or they just left it to the politicians?
No, in the first assembly in Epidavros, in Piada, there were only, let's say, notables, proesti, present, and a lot of intellectuals, some clergymen who were also intellectuals. However, when this constitution was amended in Astros, almost every important man in the revolution was present. So the amended constitution, the constitution of Astros, which was essentially the constitution of Epidorus, that amended and in a great way, what's the word?
Adapted or what?
Βελτιώθηκε. Improved, yeah. And improved in many ways. This constitution, the constitution of Astros, which was the amended Epidaurus constitution, was the constitution that was enforced in Greece from 1823 to 1827. It was the constitution that Greek revolutionaries internalized, and a constitution that was, internalized, meaning it was accepted, it had an expressive function, as modern legal theory describes. It has an educative function. It helped the Greeks realize what are their rights, what are their duties, what the political system means, what democracy means, what liberalism and rule of law means. So it was very important, especially the amended constitution, the Astros constitution, was very important for the revolutionaries. And Kostas, I can see now that there's a question by Anastasia Giannakidou.
Stefanos, I cannot see this question. Can you please read it?
Hi, Anastasia. I can read it. It is visible to me. So, wasn't the expectation, quote from Anastasia, wasn't the expectation of more US support and involvement in the revolution an unrealistic one to begin with? Was Mavrokordatos disappointed when it did not materialize in a substantial way? Did his attitude to the US change? Sorry, I missed part of the talk. Maybe this was mentioned. Yeah, actually, it was mentioned, but don't worry, Anastasia, because this is a very an excellent question. Mavrokordatos apparently didn't know that the change of policy in the United States, the adoption of the Monroe Doctrine, he was not unrealistic, because despite the existence of the Monroe Doctrine, at least two persons in the Monroe cabinet, two ministers, two secretaries, tried their best to persuade the president, Monroe, who was very friendly to the Greeks, but also to John Quincy Adams, the Secretary of State, who was a realist, and he was the one behind the Monroe Doctrine. They did their best in a cabinet meeting that took 2 hours. They did their best to persuade the rest of the cabinet, the rest of the ministers, that there should be an exception, especially for the Greeks, an exception to the Monroe Doctrine, because these revolutionaries are the Greeks, after all, the descendants of the famous classical era Greeks. Mavrokordatos was disappointed, of course, because the reply by John Quincy Adams was very friendly, but John Quincy Adams said clearly, wrote clearly to Mavrokordatos that there is no chance for the United States to send troops or any other kind of a government assistance, US government assistance to the Greeks. So Mavrokordatos abandoned he tried. I don't know if you had the chance to see this part of to attend this part of the lecture. Mavrokordatos, his last attempt was to request from the Greek government to send him, Mavrokordatos, as an ambassador to the United States. Mavrokordatos was believed that he was competent enough to persuade the Americans as long as he had the chance to travel to the United States, meet the members of the American political system, not only from the government, but also from Congress. Daniel Webster was the one who was the leading congressman supporting the Greeks. So Mavrokordatos tried desperately to persuade the Greek governments to help him go to the United States, visit the United States, and then he was in the hoping that he would be quite persuasive to the Americans, but nobody was interested. The British loan, the loan from the city came to Greece. Everybody was very happy using pounds, British pounds. The alliance with the British sounds to the Greeks the best medium for them to achieve their national independence, having Britain as monopolizing their protection. Actually, they asked for this monopoly with a declaration during the spring of 1825, with the so-called Ψήφισμα Υποτέλειας, which actually was not it was something different. It was a call to the Great Britain. It was an invitation to the British to undertake the protection of Greeks. So after all these developments, there was no point anymore for Mavrokordatos to pursue his pro-American policy. The only thing that it was, the only thing that was left, it was for the Greek political system to simulate, to adapt the American Constitution and the American institutions. And the Greeks did that with the Constitution in Trezina. Constitution in Trezina was modeled after the US Constitution. So in that sense, some connection, institutional connection, not geopolitical connection of Greeks and the Americans were achieved. But it was achieved for only 6 months, because when Kapodistrias came to Greece, asked for the constitution to be abolished. He thought that a constitution like that was rather, as he said, these were his particular wording expression. It was a razor in the hands of a small child. A constitution like, reminiscent of the modeled after the US Constitution, a constitution of a republic. It was a razor in the hands of institutionally immature people like the Greeks. And Kapodistrias was right in many respects, of course. This was a very ambitious constitution for people who were subjects of the Ottoman Empire for more than 400 years.
But on the other hand, how did he see that Greece governed? He would not live forever, even if he had not been assassinated. What would be the future of Greece? How it would be who?
I don't think that Kapodistrias, when Kapodistrias was assassinated, which is a tragic event, an event which literally destroyed everything that everything that Capodistrias has achieved until that time, because it led to a ferocious civil war. So when King Otto came to Greece, it was welcomed as a messiah for the Greeks. However, Capodistrias knew that some king, Leopold or Otto, would come, and I believe that Capodistrias probably hoped that he was there was a chance that he would become a kind of a prime minister or the most trusted advisor of the new king. But I'm afraid that the new king, any new king, Leopold or Otto, would come with their own entourage, with their own advisors. And actually, Otto did just that. He came to Greece, accompanied by a very strong regency, and Greek politicians became just puppets for at least until 1843. I mean, they were political puppets. They couldn't govern Greece. The Bavarians were the ones who governed the country, and Greek politicians were expendables.
Stefanos, do you have any other question? Because I don't see the Q&A. Stefanos, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes. Do you see any other questions on the Q&A?
No.
Oh, okay. So let me see. Let me ask my last question, then we'll close because that goes too long. From your lecture today and the lecture you had last year, it comes out that Mavrokordatos was one of the major personalities of the revolution of 1821. But from what I learned at school, and I don't know if it's the same thing today, Mavrokordatos is not portrayed as a personality of that size. So has anything changed today in order to do justice to the subject?
Yeah. Actually, Mavrokordatos was the most important political figure of the Greek Revolution. And this is now totally accepted by the mainstream historiography. The historiography of the leading, of the prominent Greek historians. Not only Greek historians, but if you have the chance to read Mark Mazauer's excellent book on the Greek Revolution, you will realize that because Mazauer did an excellent job using the new historiographical literature about the Greek Revolution and all the new trends, and using them his synthesis, you will realize that Mavrokordatos was almost for every major Greek historian, is the major political figure, and almost every Greek historian appreciates his contribution to the Greek Revolution and the cause of the Greek national independence. However, having said that, we should emphasize that the most, let's say, popular, simplistic, less scientific literature, the literature that one can find in the internet, in low quality books about the revolution, in some older historians, Mavrokordatos is still demonized. I mean, for me, this is something which is funny and strange and sad at the same time. However, given the fact that historiography is now almost unified in its approach to this particular figure. I suppose that after, I don't know, some years or maybe some decades, even the most popular historiography will abandon this simplistic view of Mavrokordatos and adapt the mainstream, the scientific, let's say, view of the Greek Revolution in general, not only of Mavrokordatos in particular.
Will this include the school books?
Yeah, I think that the school books have now been rather
Move in that direction.
modernized, and I mean, I have, from what I'm hearing from my students, because to tell you the truth, the last time that I read in a school book about the Greek Revolution, it was in early 1980s. So I'm not the most
Current also,
yeah.
Very good. Thank you very, very much for this.
You are very welcome,
very interesting
Kostas.
lecture.
Thank you very much, Kostas.
And I hope that we see you in Chicago. Let's go, Stefanos, if there is no other questions, let's close it. And can you stay for a few minutes, and then because I don't want to keep you for a very long time. Let's close it, Stefanos. Thank you, everybody, very much, and we look forward to see you at the next lecture.
Thank you, Kostas. I'd like to thank you, Konstantinos, Stefanos Akelaridis, and Savas Kogzoglou, and Hellenic Link Midwest for inviting me to give a second lecture, the second lecture that I gave to Hellenic Link. This is a great honor. I was very happy to speak to a group of people that have a relation with Chicago. I mean, living in Chicago, or have a kind of connection with the city, this beautiful city.
Very good. Thank you very much. Please stay for a few minutes after Stefanos closes.